With that, our presenter tonight is Mr. Troy Salzer. Troy is the extension educator in St. Louis County. He grew up in Barnum, Minnesota, where he was raised on a commercial beef and forage operation. Troy received his bachelor's and master's degrees in animal science and animal nutrition from the University of Minnesota. His cattle are managed in a multi-paddock system where they graze on native pastures, improved perennial pastures, field corn, and cover crops. They also direct market beef, pork, and vegetables. Troy is very interested in research and is currently involved in a reestablishment winter feeding area study with the University of Minnesota Extension beef team. With that, go ahead, Troy, and take it away.
Thank you very much, Brenda. I really appreciate those kind words here this evening, and hopefully I'll be able to help folks along here tonight at not only thinking about the aspects of reducing cattle costs in the winter and fall feeding time period, but also think about the aspects of time savings in regards to what it takes to manage their cow herd through the course of this winter. So to really get us started this evening, as I think about my own operation and also think about helping others that are similar with having a full-time day job and only do this as the part-time farmer, I often think about the aspects of what is the change that we're going to do or implement. What is that going to cost in regards to capital? Is it going to be an additional feeder wagon, maybe a bale shredder? All of these things have a capital cost to them. And also not only that aspect of capital costs that we have to consider, but also the equipment required to run in front of it, such as tractor and diesel fuel and all of that sort of stuff. So then I also think about the components of, will it save me time? Will it save me money? Will it make my job easier? Especially as we do these things in the dark, oftentimes before and after work. And then a component that I really feel strongly about is the aspects of, can this piece of equipment or that investment in equipment actually make my job safer as I go about doing the work? And that's not only in relationship to me, but also the family members and perhaps help that you're hiring in that manner. I realize that this isn't necessarily a component of feed costs necessarily, but from a part-timer's perspective, the first thing that you need to do is get rid of all your troublemakers. Anything with a high head, anything with bad feet and legs, bad udders, bad attitude. And in some cases, we need to think about these things. And I realize that especially as we are trying to grow our operations and retain numbers, it's just not worth it. These things take a lot of extra time, babysitting, and in most cases, they are also some of the poorest doers in your operation. So just cut your losses and move on in relationship to this. You'll be much happier in the long run. Some of the things that I think about in regards to operations, especially related to cow-calf, is the component of ways in which we can save time on pastures. As we do a better job managing these pastures, we will extend the grazing season, and that will substantially reduce not only the costs associated with feeding the animals throughout the course of the year, but also it will reduce the amount of time. It doesn't take a lot of time to move cattle from pasture to pasture, and it's a great opportunity for us to look them over. And so think about the investment in things like water infrastructure, permanent fencing, And as you go through this process, we have a lot of great resources in extension, but I'll also encourage you to reach out to the folks at Natural Resource Conservation Service or your local SWCD or Soil and Water Conservation District, as they've got really good resources and also potentially some financial help to help you along in that process if you so desire. Things like these here, temporary polywire fences on the left, a nice alley on the right, and just simply opening gates with good gate handles to allow cattle to go from one paddock to another. These things can be extremely beneficial both in summertime as well as in wintertime. And keep that picture in the right-hand corner in mind as we get into the aspects of rotationally grazing bales as an option later in the presentation. Some of the things that I think about in regards to keys to grazing successfully, stockpile specifically, as we move into that section, is the more that we move those animals from paddock to paddock or area to area, it improves our utilization. The research data would suggest that we can vary in utilization from everything as low as 25 to 30% up to about 80, 85% utilization based on your management techniques and the length of time that the animals spend on a particular paddock. And so keeping that in mind, that is no different for summer grazing or the aspects of stockpile grazing as well. So as we increase the amount of management, we will improve that utilization. And with the right circumstances, that will help you get not only perhaps better utilization of feed, but also better performance on the animals. This takes time, and we understand this, and so that is that trade-off, especially as you work, depending on the time available. But oftentimes, moving them even just once a day will improve that utilization from 50% to about 75%. When you're doing this, think about the water source. That's really critical. And when putting in or looking at these scenarios, if you need to put in cross fencing, think about that in advance. In this picture on the bottom right, these special fence posts are called tumble wheels. I utilize those for winter grazing, especially if we have frozen soils and it's difficult to put posts in the ground. In this particular case, as long as the snow doesn't get too deep, these actually just tumble ahead to the as you move those or move that wire ahead so that you can give the animals a new spot. In addition to that, what is interesting about these is the spokes that are not on the ground are hot and the animals don't play with them or itch on them, which can be the case if they weren't energized. As we look at different forms of stockpile forages, I think it's critical to think about how much snow depth the animals can graze through to get that, what species or product you are trying to graze, what are the labor requirements, does the soil conditions allow you to have access to that? Once again, water, and also what type of forage or forage quality will they produce as you go about feeding this to your livestock. Of course, the most common probably is the aspects of crop residue. Generally, this residue is fairly low in protein and also low in energy, and so we have to be strategic about where we feed it. But if you utilize a crop residue field and don't intend to get every last bit out of it, you can fence the whole field in, and it really doesn't take you a tremendous amount of time. And yet, in most cases, other than the time it takes you to fence that, it can be fairly inexpensive feed for you to be able to maintain mature cows in their early part of gestation. Be sure to watch their body condition score. Allowing them access to water is essential, as this material is extremely dry, and in order to get good digestion, it's critical. In this scenario, if you have the ability to interseed some cover crops in there, it'll improve the quality and also improve the utilization. We typically can graze through about 6 to 12 inches of snow. So even though you really can't see the material, the cattle will dig for it. And one thing that I think a lot about is the ability to carry this over. Yes, it'll degrade over the winter time, especially if it's heavy, wet snow, but oftentimes you can carry that into the spring and still be somewhat useful in regards to that. Sure, the utilization will go down, but it will still maintain some of its feed value. Here's just some cows on stocks. This is one of stocks that has been interseeded on the right with some winter rye, a great way in which to increase the value of those corn stalks. Wheat stubble as well. Next, we move on to cool season grasses. Oftentimes, if we don't let cool season grasses get mature, they are prone to laying down, especially in heavy snowbelt regions of the state of Minnesota, like northeastern Minnesota. In other parts, it's maybe not quite as critical to let it get quite as mature, but this is something that you can evaluate from year to year and kind of develop a plan in relationship to this. There are certain species that are better in relationship to that. So tall fescue, for example, has a lot better standability as compared to orchard grass. Orchard grass is great from a palatability standpoint, but if you harvest it once, it stays vegetative and lays down very easy if you get any snowfall on that particular grass, making it pretty difficult for the animals to get at that. Generally speaking, I think about their ability to graze up to 8 inches of snow. If you go that deep, it requires a lot of extra time. In that, we need to be considering moving those animals at least twice a day, if not 3 times a day, as the animals go ahead and graze that. You'll actually begin to see compacted snow like you see in this particular picture to the right of the animals, where they've grazed earlier in the day, but with that snow cap on the remaining portion, it's still pliable enough that the animals can dig down under that and get good, adequate mouthfuls of grass as they are grazing in that particular case. One thing you will find with moving the animals more frequently like this, the animals become very, very tame, and their flight zone virtually goes to 0, allowing you to work with those animals much better throughout the course of the year. A benefit from doing this, allowing you much easier cattle handling as you are needing to work them and such. In addition to that, cover crops is another great option. I think as you're developing a mix, it's important to think about cold tolerant cover crops specifically, if you are interested in grazing that later into the season. Things like radishes and turnips, as well as annual cereals like oats and barley, and then including some winter cereals for the potential of regrowing in spring are all really, really good options. If you allow these particular plants to or plant them early enough in the season where they get a lot of foliage, First of all, the radishes and the turnips, as well as your oats, for example, will continue to grow as the ground below that vegetative cover is well insulated and will continue to grow even after we see 20-degree Fahrenheit temperatures. Those particular plants, specifically the brassicas, will continue to grow after that and continue to add additional tonnage for the livestock. These things tend to be very wet and will reduce the amount of water that the animals will consume. So that's something to think about in regards to that. And if they are extremely vegetative, Dr. Mosel and I did some research where we saw great benefits in the digestion process if we add additional dry matter to it. And that is something that might be valuable from the standpoint of utilizing that crop better. In addition to that, it will tend to stand well and give you the ability to graze even when that material is in as much as 12 inches of snow from that standpoint. They're very high quality. They also have great standability, extended growth in the season, and then also give us the benefit of soil health from that standpoint. Another option is growing crops like millet and corn, specifically for grazing. They are great from the standpoint of standability. We do lose a fair amount in quality as that material becomes more mature. That cellulose is very undigestible, but it gives us a chance to continue to grow when we have excessive snowfalls, although it will require us a bit more maintenance from the standpoint of management of those animals, making sure that we manage them correctly so that they don't experience things like acidosis from that standpoint. In that case, we probably will need additional protein to digest that fiber. And so thinking about the ability of adding some nitrogen fixing plants in that mix, maybe some very, very late maturing soybeans could be added, or actually utilizing things like annual clovers are also a very good option. As the corn matures, it allows those clovers to grow and gives that protein to the livestock as they're grazing it. It has great standability, and also it has the ability to be carried forward. And what I mean by that is allow you to graze that even into that spring season as the snow begins to regress. Another aspect or option is thinking about bale grazing. But with this in mind, we should think about the aspects of how the soil conditions are in the area that you would like to do bale grazing. Thinking about, once again, the water. And this is an area, if you are utilizing electric fence, we often have to think a lot about the grounding, especially if we have very deep snow, in that the snow will act as a grounding agent and the animals won't get the shock that they should through your fence. And so having a very good charger, as well as having a good grounding system for your fence is essential. The other thing I always recommend with bale grazing is it gives you the ability to, or you should consider having that second wire so that if they do get through the first one, they don't have the ability to gain access to all of the bales. This here is an example of one of the farmers I work with having it set up. You can see that His intentions are to graze half of it at a time so that in essence, he's working on the left side. In the future, he'll do the right side. This is an area that was very low in nutrient value in the soil. And so by him doing this, he was able to, after that, generate a lot more summer forage as he fertilized this area with the animals grazing it. Here's some additional pictures of that. I'd like to bring your attention to the upper right-hand corner and just look at how nice and uniform that application of manure is on there. Yes, it's probably heavy compared to what we would normally want to have on there. But if we only do this once every 3, 4, or 5 years, it gives us a great way in which to have that manure spread out in an area where the animals still remain very clean, out of the yard, and in essence, doing a lot of the work for us. As you're doing this, I think it's important to think about the nutrition. We need to think about the quality of that hay. So forage testing it is really critical, whether it's the hay or the forage, and making sure that the animals are staying in good condition. And here's an example in the foreground. We have a mixture of cover crops, which is winter rye and turnips. And in the background, we have some low quality hay that I had purchased. And we placed that after we had planted the winter rye and turnips with the intention that it would be on a ridge or a hilltop that had very poor productivity. And every day, this particular group needed 10 bales of that hay. And so we would move the fence over top of those 10 bales, feed that, and then give them a strip of this very high quality turnips and winter rye in order to give them adequate nutrition in relationship to that. As we go further into the season, if we need to use bale feeding, one option that I have learned from folks that is very, very common is the practice of feeding weekly. Maybe it's Saturday, maybe it's Sunday, whichever day it might be, where these folks will place enough forage out for the entire week. And in this particular case, then the animals, in essence, feed themselves, which works very nicely and has a fairly low labor requirement. And it provides you the flexibility throughout the course of the week so that you can just primarily go out, check them, check the water to make sure that they've got access to water and such. I'd encourage you to move the feeders every time. That way you distribute the manure fairly well. Place this in areas where your soils need additional nutrients. And I encourage people to keep the cattle out of your cow yard until it gets closer to the calving season, if you're going to put them in the cow yard at all, as this helps to minimize the amount of bacteria that you have in your cow yard. One thing that I encourage you to look at, even with the aspects of utilizing hay feeders, we will often see anywhere from 30 to even 50% waste as we're using hay feeders, as in this picture. And so I'd bring interest to that and take that into consideration as you are feeding this way. As when you give them unlimited access, they will tend to take a bite, pull out. If it falls out of their mouth and falls on the ground, it becomes bedding. It no longer will be considered feed, as in this example. Another option that I've actually implemented ourselves that I think has worked extremely well is we have our paddocks set up on our farm. And so it allows us to capture the value of having those paddocks with very easy switches from one area to another. And so in this particular case, we will actually go ahead and feed anywhere from 7 to 30 days, 40 days worth of hay when it's easy to get the equipment in with feeding the bales. And in that particular case, we'll just put enough for basically 48 hours for the group size that we're feeding. And then that will allow us to simply open gates every 2 days and allow the cattle to migrate from one area to another. It's really important to understand where your water is at and make sure that you feed in that particular area. And the other thing that we've experienced or found is that if you put animals into a particular paddock, you need to be sure to allow them to consume all of that feed. If you add to it, the feed waste or feed loss goes up dramatically. And so that it would not be one of my suggestions in relationship to how you would handle that. Once again, place your bales out in areas that need to have improved productivity. And here again, it will dramatically impact or benefit your summer grazing from that standpoint. Another thing that I really like about this approach is that it allows me to put nutrients into pastures in areas where it's very difficult to use conventional fertilizer to actually fertilize those areas. And it's made a vast difference in relationship to our summer grazing carrying capacity in these particular paddocks. Once again, keep the cattle out of your cow yard, and that will help you come your calving season as that'll be approaching. Some of the benefits with these different approaches is the manure is placed in areas where you need it. You'll have reduced environmental impact, and your urine that the cows deposit will actually be out in your paddocks, a major source of nitrogen that will actually benefit your crop growth the next year. It will reduce fuel use. This is true not only from the standpoint of starting the equipment on a regular basis, but tractors are more efficient if you start them and run them for a period of time once they're warmed up, and it'll allow you to feed for many days as compared to daily or every other day sort of feeding approaches. It will reduce electricity because in most cases we have to plug our tractors in order to get them to start appropriately in the wintertime. And from my point of view, it's a great way to check your livestock from that standpoint. Healthier livestock as well, and you'll see reduced loss from that perspective. Another aspect that I'd encourage you to think about is how much does it really cost you to feed those stored feeds? So many people tell me that their feed is free or very low cost compared to what it actually costs them if they take into consideration things like depreciation, machine costs, fertilizer, all of that sort of land value, all of those sort of things. And so I think it's really critical to think about the aspects of all of those costs in relationship to your winter feeding processes. I'd encourage you to think about contacting other folks that might be able to do some custom feeding for you and compare and contrast that option versus doing it yourself. Maybe this is a way in which you can increase your numbers on your farm by in essence, utilizing some of the fields for grazing as compared to making hay. And perhaps it would also give you the ability to reduce the need for haying equipment or chopping equipment from that standpoint, and actually make your operation more efficient from that perspective. In addition to that, I think about the picture on the right and the opportunity to do some traveling. It still means you can be back for calving season, but maybe you wouldn't have to freeze your fingers fixing frozen water. With that, that concludes my presentation here, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that folks might have.
All right, Troy, we have a couple of questions in the Q&A. What are your best ideas for winter water other than a Ritchie?
Over time, I've had the experience and have had conversations with folks out there in regards to developing springs that continuously flow. That is a pretty good option for folks if that might be something that you see on your farm or ranch. So with that in mind, that might be a pretty good option. In addition to that, some of the waters that are out there, depending on cattle numbers, a continuous flow with some of these winter float systems work very well. In this particular field here, the water is way over behind that hill, meaning the well and pump, and that is just shallow buried from that point all the way up to where this cow is right on the left side there, which is approximately 3/4 of a mile. And that water line is only approximately 8 to 12 inches deep. And with that in mind, what we do is we just have a float with a bleeder valve on the side, and we just allow that water to continuously flow. So we set the level very low in the tank, and once the float shuts the large volume flow off, then it just continues to release at approximately between 3/4 of a gallon and a gallon per minute. That sprays on the float, keeping that float open, and the cattle just continue to drink on it. If it overflows, try to make it so that the water actually has an exit so that the animals don't have to deal with icy conditions to approach the tank. Other questions?
So a reminder to everyone, if you have questions, put them in the Q&A. Our next question is that Tumble Wheel is very cool. Where can I get one?
They are manufactured by Gallagher. They are cool. The only thing I would encourage you to do is there is a particular clip that is their weakness, and especially in the wintertime when it's cold and they become more brittle. And so if you go online, any company that handles Gallagher equipment, they would have them. They cost somewhere in the neighborhood of about $170 a piece, which is very expensive. So we want to make sure that they continue to last. And what I have found is that if you go much over 1/8 of a mile in length of your poly wire, it becomes more difficult to get them to tumble if you're just pulling from one end. But you can very easily move them ahead if they are non-energized, just by going through the snow, pushing them ahead, and then going on to the next place from that standpoint.
All right, next question. What are your recommendations for changing grazing strategy during the very dry conditions that we are having?
So over the last couple years, we have had extended periods of dry, and that strategy starts right away in spring. As we increase the amount of rest that we have on these pastures, starting right away at the beginning of the season, allowing some of the forages to become more mature. That material will help shade the ground, reducing the amount of evaporative moisture loss. And that's a really critical component for that grass to recover later in the season. So even though you will graze it in the future, that extra moisture that has been retained there will cause that grass to bounce back faster. In addition to that, if we have good vegetative cover, that vegetative cover will allow the moisture, if we get rain, to actually absorb more readily into that soil. And in that particular case, if you have more interest in that, some of the presentations coming up at the Soil Management Summit in December will help you to better understand that. And I'd encourage you to think about that. In addition to that, even as an example, this year on our operation, we planted some up in Barnum, we planted some oats, winter rye, as well as turnips. We included some soybeans just because I had some. And in that particular case, planted August 14th and 15th with a total of 2 inches. That particular area has produced approximately 3/4 of a ton of really high quality dry matter. And so after last year, especially, I've been encouraged to continue to have people plant crops that have the ability to grow. Now, every day at that point in northern Minnesota, and if you shift to southern Minnesota, we can probably go to September 1st with that date. But every day makes a huge difference in that we reduce the amount of growing degree units that we accumulate. So think about that. Strategically getting it planted in under rains are also very helpful from that standpoint. So those are just a few things that I'd encourage you to consider.
What is the furthest you can plan for cattle to walk from their feeding area?
That is a fantastic question. Question that I believe it was the University of Montana, Montana State University. They actually did a study where they looked at that, and with gestating cows, they can travel back and forth in your typical aged cows approximately one mile without any impact on their overall productivity. In addition to that, what they found is as long as the cattle maintained a good body condition score, it actually improved their ability to calve unassisted as the cows were in better physical condition from that standpoint.
All right. What are the spacing recommendations for those tumble wheels?
My experience, if you can keep the poly wire tight enough, and that is generally something that is very critical, especially if you get heavy snow. If you can keep that tight enough, about 50 feet, a little bit closer together than you would normally have step and post is what my experience has been. I would encourage people that If you anticipate or did receive heavy snow, very damp snow, I encourage people to get out and check their cows right away in the morning. Otherwise, that drooping or weight on that poly wire will tend to drop it down, and cows will move themselves, unfortunately, if you don't get there before they decide to.
Do you have some ideas or advice about stockpiling forages?
So there were several options in the presentation in regards to things that you can consider. One thing that, from my point of view, gives you a great opportunity is if you have some forage production fields, alfalfa fields, and what have you, utilizing them as late season growth. So if you typically produce 2 or 3 crops of hay, or even up to 4, go ahead and stockpile that last crop of hay and utilize that as a way in which to supplement your regular pastures. So avoid grazing them too tight, all your regular pastures all season long. Then use that stockpiled forage when you get into that fall season. And if you do that correctly and you didn't chew your regular grass down too much, it will bounce back and give you additional forage later in the season. Another option is if you have a portion of your fields that you need to renovate, going ahead, maybe in August, even in early September, working them up and planting in one of these fall cover crops, you can really gain the value of fall grazing. Or if you planted winter rye, you could actually do the same and benefit in spring, as that winter rye or winter triticale is taking off very aggressively as a way in which to extend the grazing season in spring as well.
So Mike was looking for a no-till his pasture this fall. What do you recommend as a good mix for summer and fall grazing?
Summer grazing is one of which is important to look at the productivity of the grasses that you're trying to grow in that particular region. The beef team, including Dr. Mosel, as well as some others, are evaluating several different species options up at Grand Rapids. I think that is representative of northern Minnesota. That would probably be different, and I'd encourage you to think about and talk to folks like myself in the southern part of the state, because that'll probably be quite a bit different, specifically thinking about the temperatures and all of that. So cool season grasses are one of the components that would be the focus in my particular case. If you're going to do no-till, the grass that I would encourage you to think about, in that it is the most competitive seedling, would be orchard grass in particular. You could also include some perennial rye, annual rye, or tall fescue. Those would probably be the ones of most interest to me. Meadow fescue, we're still evaluating that seedling vigor, but if that one comes along well and has good winter hardiness, there's the advantage in that, as well as the perennial rye, in that they tend to have a waxy layer and have a natural ability to repel water. And if we're going to be stockpiling it, that would be a good option for them to have. If you're doing pastures, I would encourage you, as long as you don't have to control weeds in these pastures, to consider also including a type of legume or a couple legumes as ways in which to naturally fix some of its own nitrogen, and also improve the forage quality with those particular legumes included.
How often should I renew my pasture if I live in northern Minnesota?
That seems like a loaded question to me. It really revolves a lot around how you manage those pastures. If you're doing a good job managing them, feeding them appropriately, making sure that when you're grazing, you're not grazing it too short. The stand that you have out there should be able to maintain itself for, 20, 30 years in that particular case. If you're abusing those pastures, that changes the scenario quite dramatically. And so with that in mind, you may have to be looking at doing some sort of management related to reseeding that. Now, the approach that you take to improving them could be no-tilling, could be frost seeding, or it could be the aspects of bale grazing on a particular area to help renovate that. All of those are very legitimate options, and you just have to strategically figure out which of those options are appropriate for you. Doing a better job with the aspects of management, though, will go a long way in avoiding the need for some of that sort of additional investment and improvement.